Yes, we've been talking about my chainsaws and whatnot. I've been getting things ready to go to do some work. I got about 6 trees I got to deal with, and I gotta climb. I gotta climb all of them. Actually, I'm gonna have to climb them all. And the heck, yeah. I gotta climb them all, so that get all that stuff together. I got most of my tree climbing stuff in one spot, but it's talking about my saws. I got this big 28-inch bar. I could use a larger bar for that saw because I do want to get a small chainsaw mill, because I got one tree that I'm eyeballing. The trunk of that tree, I want to maybe get some slabs out of it. So skip chain and a longer bar, because you're not in a hurry or nothing. You know, you're cutting a trunk, cutting slabs out of a trunk. You're not in a hurry, so I think that 60cc would probably do it. If I try it and it doesn't work, then I'll just have to think about getting a larger saw, right? Incidentally, speaking of like saw maintenance, the pro saws, you want to not only do you want to grease this tip up here, with the proper grease. You want to use the proper bar oil. A lot of people say, well, if you run good bar oil, you won't need to grease the tip. And I've heard people say, well, bar oil just washes the grease out and blah blah blah. And that's not really true. I mean, I use grease in the tip of my nose on my sprocket here, and it's still got grease in it, and I've been running the crap out of it. So, yeah, I had to deal. My neighbor had a tree come down, and I went and helped them with that. Drug the trunks over to my place behind my truck. Just put a chain on there and drug them over. You're in the country. Nobody cares much if you drag a tree down the street a little bit. So anyway, I was processing up the trunk sections of that tree the other day. But when you talk about maintenance of your chainsaw, I've seen some people, they complain about the 562 XP. Maybe it was an earlier model of mine. I don't know. Mine's the first generation. There's a second now. But I never had no problems. If you flood that saw, which you could do, get a little bit overzealous with that primer, then what you do is you get yourself a sawhorse, a wooden sawhorse with maybe a nice homemade wooden sawhorse that you can stick the engine up on. Put your chainsaw up there and put the engine right on the flat part of the sawhorse, and then squeeze the trigger all the way, and have the safety off, and then go ahead and pull that several times forcefully, and it will start. That will unflood it. So that's one thing you could do. You hear people talking about them flooding or whatever. So I've had mine flood. That's the way you take care of it. But I've heard people say, well, that 5.62's had issues, blah blah blah. I've had zero issues with mine, zero. And I've run it hard. You can see this bar is not new. You know, I run the crap out of that saw. You know, I mean, with this bar, and I've had the saw in the tree with this bar on it because that one tree was big. It was like a tree trunk with tree trunks growing out of it. That's how big it was, a 60-footer. You know, just a gigantic. It's like a hand with 4 or 5 fat fingers growing out of it. You know, and then all the little branches, of course, on it too. It's a big red maple. It's cracked in the center. It was cracked down the center, and it had rot in the middle. It was dangerous to climb. So I went and got ratchet straps that you would use for holding cargo on the back of a tractor trailer. And I ratchet strapped the tree all the way around in a couple spots to make sure that it did not come apart while I was working it. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that T435 top handle job, that's the one I was using up there, taking all the little stuff down. And then I got to a point where I had to start cutting and lowering with the bull rope, you know, like 1,000-pound chunks of tree trunk, you know. But I dropped a 20-foot section without lowering it. You learn, you know, you got to learn to rig and lower, you know, and you have to, and I did all this by myself. So you gotta be, you know, you gotta be able to put 2 and 2 together, and you gotta get good at rigging and lowering stuff, you know. And as a homeowner, if you hadn't worked in a professional environment like I did when I was young, you need to go to some seminars and get that training. You know, there's specific ways that you can rig a tree to be its own crane. You understand what I'm saying? You can use a tree to be its own crane when you're taking it down. That's a technique from Scandinavian countries. They do that over there. What else? Oh yeah, so I got new saw bar. I'm not throwing this away or nothing. It's fine. But I was talking about saw maintenance, you know, and I grease. I will occasionally put some good grease up here in the nose, okay, because it has greasable nose, right? I know the steel bars don't have that no more, which is kind of crazy. But it comes back to people saying, well, you don't need to do that if you got good saw bar oil, blah blah blah. But you know, the thing is that this stuff can get plugged up. These little holes here. There's a hole here, and there's a hole here. So they're oriented so if you flip that bar, you know, that the oil comes off of the saw, gets in that hole and goes down your track with your chain. So a lot of people get lazy, and then they don't do anything with their bar. They think, oh, I'll just wipe off the saw and things are good. No, you know, when you get done with your saw, you need to take the bar off, the chain off. You need to get all the crud out of that groove. And I see a lot of guys go from that actually do this themselves. I've seen a lot of guys go this way, but I don't go that way. I start down here at the sprocket and I go this way, and then I check the hole here for the oil, not the big hole, because that's where your bar tension is. Okay, when you tighten up your chainsaw bar to pull it forward, that mechanism goes in that hole. Now this little hole right there, if it's plugged up on your bar and it's kind of camouflaged with some crud, you know, you may not see that little hole. But you want to keep like a paper clip on hand so that you can clean that little hole out on each side, get all that sawdust and oil and crap out of there. And you can get a special tool that will rake the inside of that rail, and you want to do that on both sides. Okay, make sure that this is all clean of debris, and make sure that it's properly lubed. You can buy an Oregon synthetic grease lube that you could pump in there, and you only just pump it to where you see it coming out here and here and here, and you just turn that as you pump grease in there, and look how easily that moves, you know. So once you get that all lubed up, then just, you know, move it around a bit and it's ready to go. And you could do that, you know, like every 10-20 runs of your saw, just depending on how it looks and how dirty the saw, the conditions are that you're using the saw in. Make sure you clean out your saw. Well, take the cover off, clean out the inside of the saw area, everything, you know, because if the whole area where the bar oil is supposed to come out, if that all is full of caked in muck, you know, from running your sawdust caked with oil and other crap, you need to get that out of there so that oil can run into your bar, right? Otherwise you're going to get your bar hot, and that's going to cause you issues. Cause you premature wear on your bar. A lot of guys flip their bar every time, and I don't do that. Why is that? Because I don't exert pressure, hardly any pressure at all on my bar. I let the saw do the work. You got a nice sharp chain, the saw does most of the work. You don't have to exert a whole lot of pressure. You got the saw. If you got a pro saw and you got dogs on there, you know, saw dogs, then you just let it suck those saw dogs into the trunk if you're bucking, and, you know, just let the saw do the work. Saw will cut, and the saw dogs will hold it. Okay, the saw will cut, and then move it, just slide it back, and it will take another bite, and then just saw, and that's it. You shouldn't have to put a lot of force on your bar, because if you do, that means your chain is not sharp. Okay, your chain's not sharp. I know it's kind of a voodoo science of sharpening chain. I've sharpened a lot of chain, let me tell you, chainsaw chain. One of my brothers, he got real good at it. He got so good at it, he became the designated on-site sharpener when we were cutting railroad ties. But yeah, so you will see more wear on the paint down here on my long bar, okay, and there's some wear right there. I got into some big heavy wood. I'm not sure how that happened, but anyway, but you will see more wear on the paint on the bottom of my bar, basically from about the middle of that bar back. But that's not really wear on the steel, you know, because when I look down this bar, it looks pretty true, you know. But you can buy the tool that will lay on there at a 90-degree angle with a small file, and you just gently run that along there to just make sure that it's completely even, because that's the way you want your saw chain to run. You want your saw chain to run even down the bar. Now you can check it on both sides, right? It looks pretty doggone even on that side, and it looks pretty doggone even on that side. But if it doesn't look quite even, or you're cutting it in a banana style, then it could be a couple things. It could be that your bar is not completely flat, you know, not completely flush, you know, maybe one side's a little bit more worn than the other on your rail there, or it's your chain. The drive links on the chain could be out of whack, and that will cause you to banana. So if you can, or you got a little bit of pinch in your bar. Those are all things you got to look at, right? Come back to another one. I'll see you there.